It's 1:45 a.m. You're staring at the ceiling, not because you want to, but because your mind won't stop. You're not thinking about just one thing. You're thinking about everything. The choices you made, the people who left, the way the world seems so fragile, so unfair, and the strange sinking feeling that maybe it's not going to get any better. Maybe this is just how life is. You tell someone about these thoughts. They shrug and smile. You're just overthinking. But what if you're not? What if the very thoughts that keep you up are not signs of a problem, but signs that you're seeing the world exactly as it is? That you're not lost in thought, you're lost in truth. Arthur Schopenhauer, one of the most misunderstood philosophers in history, believed just that. He argued that the deepest thinkers often suffer not because they're broken, but because they see what others work hard to avoid. In his eyes, life wasn't beautiful by default. It was difficult, relentless, full of pain, and the clearer you saw it, the more painful it became. Most people learn to distract themselves, numb themselves, or lie to themselves. But Schopenhauer believed that true wisdom comes when you stop pretending, when you face life's darkness without blinking, and that's exactly what we're going to do. Today, we're diving into the mind of a man who stared life in the face and refused to look away, because the deeper you think, the more clearly you see. But clarity, real clarity, always comes with a cost. Welcome to Mantis Library, where we explore the thinkers who saw the world too clearly and ask what they saw that most of us miss. Arthur Schopenhauer was not born into suffering. He was born into comfort. The son of a wealthy German merchant, he grew up surrounded by books, languages, and fine European salons. But comfort never shielded him from the truth, only delayed it. At 17, tragedy cracked his world open. His father, plagued by depression and paranoia, either fell or jumped from the attic window of their home. The official record said, accident. Arthur knew better. That single moment left a mark no inheritance could erase. He drifted into philosophy with a kind of urgency, not to build theories, but to answer something raw and real. Why does life feel so heavy, so unstable, so endlessly unsatisfying? His mother, Johanna, a famous novelist and socialite, found his gloom insufferable. She begged him to stop ruining the mood at her parties. Eventually, she told him never to contact her again. He didn't. From there, Schopenhauer chose solitude. And in that solitude, he started writing. What emerged was a vision of life unlike anything Europe had seen. To Schopenhauer, life wasn't a divine gift, it was a cruel cycle. We want things, we get them, then we want something else. Desire never rests, satisfaction never lasts, and happiness, at best, it's the brief pause between two waves of need. He called this cycle the work of a blind cosmic force, the will. It drives us to live, strive, compete, consume, and suffer. Not because we're doing life wrong, but because that's what life is. Where others saw meaning in progress or divine order, Schopenhauer saw a treadmill we couldn't step off. A world where even joy casts a shadow, because joy, too, is temporary. Most people run from that truth. They distract themselves, numb themselves, invent happy endings. Schopenhauer did the opposite. He chased the truth down. He named it, dissected it, and stared it in the face, no matter how ugly it was. And that's why his clarity felt so dangerous, because he wasn't speculating. He was reporting. But what made him so sure, so convinced, that clear thinking leads to not peace, but to pain? Today, overthinking is a diagnosis. It's something we're told to fix. Stop worrying. Don't be so sensitive. Try to relax. But what exactly is overthinking? We usually mean thinking too much about things you can't control, about what someone meant, what might go wrong, what could have been done differently. It's seen as a glitch, a failure to let go. But Schopenhauer would have said that's not overthinking, that's overperceiving. He believed that the more clearly you perceive the nature of the world, the more painful it becomes. This wasn't a metaphor. It was the core of his psychology. The more distinctly a man knows, he wrote, the more intelligent he is, the more pain he has. The world as will and representation. In other words, intelligence and suffering are twins, not because smart people are neurotic, but because the ability to see deeply comes with the curse of feeling deeply. A brilliant mind isn't content with surface-level answers. It keeps digging, and the deeper it digs, the more it uncovers the unfairness, the randomness, the futility. What looks like overthinking to others might actually be seeing through the illusions. Modern psychology has echoed this idea. People with high trait sensitivity or depth of processing tend to experience the strongest emotional reactions, longer ruminations, and higher anxiety. They're not necessarily broken. They're just wired to absorb more meaning, more contradiction, more complexity. And that adds up. Schopenhauer's insight wasn't new. It had ancient roots. He frequently quoted the Bible. He who increases knowledge increases sorrow. Ecclesiastes 1:18. He took this literally. To know more is not to live better, it's to carry more grief. To understand the mechanisms behind suffering, injustice, and impermanence is to lose the comfort of not knowing. Most people operate on autopilot. Enough pleasure, distraction, or routine to stay afloat. But what if you can't do that? What if your mind won't stop poking holes in the story? Then you might not be spiraling. You might be seeing clearly. Maybe you're not overthinking at all. Maybe you're just awake in a world that trains most people to stay asleep. To understand Schopenhauer, you have to understand what he meant by will. Not willpower, but will with a capital W, a blind, insatiable force, the engine behind everything that lives. Plants stretching towards sunlight, wolves hunting deer, humans chasing money, validation, love. All of it, he said, is the will in motion. It's not rational. It doesn't have a goal. It just wants. The will is not something we have. It's something we are. It pulses beneath every urge, every craving, every ambition. Not because we choose it, but because we're born into it. Everywhere, in everything, the will reveals itself. The world as will and representation. For Schopenhauer, this life is a wheel powered by this will, and the will never stops turning, because desire never ends. We want something, we suffer while we don't have it. We get it, relief, briefly, then we want something else. A new partner, a better job, a nicer apartment, a bigger following. Desire isn't the expectation, it's the rule. And satisfaction, it's just the short pause before the next round of need begins. Nature runs on this principle. So does evolution. And if you look closely, so does modern life. Consumerism is just the will with a credit card. It promises happiness through things, but only if you keep buying. Every product is marketed as the one that will finally make you happy. None of them do. And that's the design. The will never says enough. It only says more. And so we chase and struggle and compete and suffer. To Schopenhauer, this isn't a glitch, it's the whole system. The will drives us forward, but it never tells us where we're going. So we move in circles, exhausted, hungry, hooked. But what happens when someone refuses to play the game? What happens when a person sees the will for what it is and says, no more? That's where Schopenhauer's real rebellion begins. In 1820, Arthur Schopenhauer walked into the halls of the University of Berlin to give his first lecture. He was young, confident, and convinced he had seen something most of the world was still pretending not to. But he made one mistake. He scheduled his lectures at the exact same time as Georg Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel, the reigning king of German philosophy. Hegel believed in reason, progress, the unfolding logic of history. His lecture hall was overflowing. Schopenhauer's almost empty. He stood in front of a handful of students, delivering a vision that went against everything popular at the time. No optimism, no progress, no promise. Just the will and the pain it leaves behind. The world wasn't ready, and so he vanished from academic life. What followed was a life of solitude and strange habits. He refused all dinner invitations, dined alone with a book every night, and named his poodle Atman, the Sanskrit word for the eternal soul, because, he said, the dog had no illusions. He even got into a physical altercation with a neighbor, pushing a seamstress he found too noisy. He lost the court case and had to pay her a pension for the rest of her life. When she died, he wrote in his journal, Obit annus, abit onus. The old woman dies, the burden departs. This was Schopenhauer, brilliant, bitter, and alone. But not because he was wrong, because he saw what others refused to. And that brings us to the real question. If suffering chases us not by accident, but by design, then maybe suffering isn't a bug in the system. Maybe it is the system. If Schopenhauer was the surgeon exposing the wound, others were painters covering it up. His main philosophical enemies, optimists. Leibniz claimed we live in the best of all possible worlds. Hegel insisted that history is a rational process, gradually unfolding toward freedom and perfection. Schopenhauer looked at war, poverty, betrayal, and death, and thought, what world are you even looking at? He saw their optimism as theology in disguise, not philosophy, but fantasy. A way to soothe the masses with ideas that felt good, even if they weren't true. You shall be told, he wrote, your philosophy is comfortless, and rightly so, on the sufferings of the world. To him, comfort wasn't the goal. Truth was. And the truth, as he saw it, was brutal. We suffer not by exception, but by default. So why do most people disagree? Because they have to. Because we're not just driven by will. We're also desperate for narratives that make the will feel less cruel. Religions promise salvation. Romanticism promises a soulmate. Consumerism promises the next purchase will finally fix the emptiness inside. All of it Schopenhauer said, is illusion. Not because it's evil, but because it's necessary. Most people simply can't bear reality without a story to soften it. He even argued that illusion is necessary for survival, a kind of beautiful lie we agree to believe. But if you're someone who sees through those lies, if none of those stories seem to stick, if the world's explanations feel too clean for your messy mind, then Schopenhauer would tell you, you're not broken, you just haven't looked away. You've refused to blur the lens, and so you suffer. More honestly, maybe, but also more awake. Most survive by distraction. You're surviving by observation. And that's a different kind of courage. But if Schopenhauer was right, if life really is suffering, and illusions are the only shelter, then where does that leave us? What is left to hold on to? For all his pessimism, Schopenhauer wasn't a nihilist. He didn't believe in apathy or cruelty. In fact, he believed the only true morality was rooted in compassion. If life is suffering, he argued, then the most ethical thing we can do is relieve that suffering wherever we see it. Not out of duty, not out of fear of hell or hope for heaven, but because at the deepest level, we recognize ourselves in others. Compassion, he wrote, is the basis of all genuine justice and charity. On the basis of morality. This wasn't just a Western idea. Schopenhauer was one of the first European philosophers deeply influenced by Eastern philosophy. From Hinduism to Buddhism, he adopted the idea that separateness is an illusion, that beneath the surface, all beings are one. What we do to others, we do to ourselves. So when we hurt another, with violence, with indifference, with cruelty, we're not winning. We're deepening the suffering of a system we're all part of. Schopenhauer's worldview was bleak, yes, but it was also deeply empathetic, because he believed everyone, rich or poor, brilliant or dull, is suffering under the same relentless will. So what can you do with that insight? If you're one of the sensitive ones, if you're tuned into the pain that others ignore, don't just sit with it. Soften it. Help someone feel seen. Feed an animal. Forgive the small failures. Speak gently. And above all, understand that kindness isn't weakness, it's resistance. You might feel like your clarity has made you distant, too awake to enjoy what others do. But it doesn't have to isolate you. It can connect you. Because to see clearly that life is hard is to know how precious even the smallest relief can be for yourself and for everyone else. If suffering is constant, if desire never ends, is there any way to step off the wheel? Schopenhauer believed there was, but only briefly. For him, the only true break from suffering came through aesthetic experience, moments when you're not wanting, chasing, or fearing, moments when you simply observe. In music, in a painting, in a poem, in the quiet presence of a tree, we forget ourselves, and with that, we forget the pain. In the aesthetic state, he wrote, we are no longer individual, but pure, will-less subject of knowledge. The world as will and representation. In those moments, we are not slaves to the will. We are witnesses, still, present, free. For Schopenhauer, music was the highest of all arts. It didn't represent the will, it expressed it directly. He once said that music was like a copy of the world's essence. When he listened to Mozart or Rossini, he felt something lift. Not joy exactly, but a kind of clarity without pain. He also found solace in routine. He walked the same path in Frankfurt every day, read the same authors, ate at the same restaurant, alone, always with a book. And then there was his dog, Atman, a poodle named after the Sanskrit word for soul. In a world full of pretending, Schopenhauer said dogs were honest. They didn't lie about their needs. They didn't chase illusions. They just were. In all these things, art, animals, nature, Schopenhauer found brief relief from the storm. Not a solution, but a pause. A moment of stillness, a breath. Maybe there is no permanent escape, but maybe there doesn't have to be. Maybe peace isn't leaving the game, but learning how to step out just long enough to remember who you are. If suffering is the cost of clarity, is it worth it? Let's come back to that restless night, the one where your mind wouldn't stop turning, where you questioned everything, not because you wanted to, but because something in you had to. You might not have called it overthinking, but maybe it was something else. Maybe it was clarity. What if overthinking isn't a flaw, but simply deep thinking in a shallow world? Arthur Schopenhauer believed that suffering and awareness go hand in hand. The more clearly you see the world, its cycles, its illusions, its quiet desperation, the harder it is to pretend. And the harder it is to pretend, the lonelier you might feel. But here's the truth he never stopped defending. You're not crazy. You're not broken. You just see too much. And that's not a weakness. It's a kind of power. Because once you see the world as it is, you can stop chasing what doesn't last. You can stop believing the lies that others need to survive, and start asking, what's left when the illusions fall away? What's left is you. The part of you that can think, create, give, observe. The part that knows life is hard, but shows up anyway. That speaks gently, that looks suffering in the eye and chooses compassion. You can use your mind not just to feel the truth, but to build something from it. As Schopenhauer wrote, a man can be himself only so long as he is alone. Not loneliness, but honest solitude. A space where you don't have to lie to yourself, where your thoughts, even the painful ones, are allowed to exist. And maybe, just maybe, that night when your thoughts wouldn't let you sleep wasn't the moment you broke down. Maybe it was the moment you woke up. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to like, share, and subscribe. Until next time, stay curious, stay mindful, and never stop exploring. We'll see you again in Mantis Library.